She looked me dead in the eyes across that diner table, pushed the menu aside, and said it like she was doing me a favor. "I'm a single mom. You can go." And I looked right back at her and said the 7 words that changed everything between us. "Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends." If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. She said, "I'm a single mom, you can go." I said, "I already know your secret. I want to tell you something about the way some people walk into a room. Not the people who command attention. The loud ones, the ones who arrive like an announcement. I mean the other kind. The ones who have learned, through years of quiet disappointment, to take up exactly as much space as necessary and not 1 inch more. The ones who sit with their backs to the wall and their eyes on the exit, not because they're paranoid, but because they stopped trusting the middle of rooms a long time ago. That was Callie Marsh. I noticed her 3 Tuesdays in a row before I ever spoke to her. She came into Harlow's Diner on Route 9 every Tuesday at 6:45 p.m., always the same corner booth, always the same order. Black coffee, the turkey club with no tomatoes, and a slice of the peach pie that she would eat slowly, like it was the one unhurried thing in her entire day. She always had a canvas tote bag that looked like it carried the weight of a small civilization. She always had paint on her hands. Not fresh paint, not the kind from a hobby. Old paint, the kind that lives in the creases of your knuckles no matter how long you scrub. She painted houses for a living. I found that out later. That evening I just noticed the paint and thought, this is a woman who works with her hands and doesn't apologize for it. She was 34. I learned that later too. She had dark blonde hair she kept in a practical braid that was always slightly coming undone by the time she arrived at the diner, like the day had been pulling at it. Her eyes were gray-green, the kind of color that changes depending on what light you catch them in. When she was tired, which was most Tuesdays, they were more gray. When something made her almost smile, they went green. I spent an embarrassing amount of the following weeks cataloging this. She never looked around for anyone. That was the thing I noticed most. Most people, when they sit alone in a diner, have this low-level radar running. Glancing toward the door, checking their phone, half present. Callie didn't. She sat down, opened a battered paperback or a small spiral notebook, and was simply there. Fully. Like solitude was a language she had become completely fluent in. I was 38. My name is Joel Vance. I ran a small landscaping business out of a pickup truck and a lot of stubbornness, and I ate dinner at Harlow's 4 nights a week because my apartment was 11 minutes away and I was a terrible cook, and also, if I'm being honest, because I had been living alone for 3 years since my last relationship ended and I had gotten used to the specific companionship of a diner. The noise around you that requires nothing from you. I want to be clear that I was not looking for anyone. I say this not as a disclaimer but as the truth, because what happened between Callie Marsh and me didn't begin with pursuit. It began with a dropped fork. The 3rd Tuesday I saw her, she knocked her fork off the table reaching for her coffee. It hit the linoleum with a small clatter. She reached down, picked it up, set it on the edge of the table, and flagged down the server without missing a beat. Efficient, unbothered, the practiced motion of someone used to handling small things alone. And I don't know what it was. The fork. The practiced motion. The paint on her hands. Something in the unbotheredness that looked less like confidence and more like a very long time of having no one to bother. I caught the server's eye before she could. "Can we get a clean fork at the corner booth?" Callie looked up. Our eyes met for approximately 2 seconds. She gave me a nod, small, economical. The kind that means thank you and I didn't need that and please don't make this a thing all at once. I looked back at my burger. But something had shifted, the way the air shifts before weather. The 4th Tuesday, she came in looking different. Not different in appearance. Same braid, same paint, same canvas tote. Different in the way she moved. Slower. There was something around her eyes that I recognized the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. The particular exhaustion that isn't physical. The kind that comes from holding something heavy for too long with no one to set it down with. She sat in her booth. Ordered her coffee. Opened her notebook but didn't write anything. Just stared at the table. Now, I want to be honest with you, because this story deserves honesty. I almost didn't say anything. Because I am a man who has learned, also through quiet years, not to impose. Not to assume that a woman sitting alone wants company. Not to mistake her stillness for an invitation. But then she closed the notebook, looked out the window at the dark Route 9 night, and exhaled. This long, slow, private exhale that was so full of tired that I felt it across the diner. I picked up my coffee and my burger and I walked to her booth. She looked up. Gray eyes tonight. Definitely gray. I know this is either the best or worst decision I've made today, I said. But you look like someone who could use company that requires absolutely nothing from you. I'll eat my burger. You do whatever you're doing. I won't talk unless you want to. She stared at me for a long moment. That's either very kind or very strange, she said. Probably both, I said. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. The blueprint of one. Sit down, she said. But I mean it, I'm not in the mood for small talk. Neither am I said. And I sat down. And we ate in silence for 20 minutes. And it was the best 20 minutes I'd had in longer than I could remember. Have you ever met someone and felt immediately, without explanation, that something was different about this one? Drop a comment. I want to know if you've felt it too. That was the beginning. It didn't look like a beginning. It looked like two tired people eating in a diner on a Tuesday. But that's how the real ones start, I've learned. Not with fireworks. With a dropped fork and a shared silence and the specific courage it takes to say, sit down, I'm not in the mood for small talk, and mean it as an invitation. Over the next 3 weeks, we became Tuesday people. Same booth. Same order. Gradually, less silence and more talking, the careful kind at first, the kind where you offer a little and wait and then offer a little more. I learned she had grown up in Millhaven, 40 minutes north. That she'd studied art for 2 years before money ran out. That she'd been painting houses for 6 years and had strong opinions about the difference between good and bad exterior trim work that I found, unexpectedly, completely fascinating. She learned I'd grown up in the same county. That I'd started the landscaping business at 29 after a decade of working for someone else. That I had a dog named Brewer who ate 1 sock per month with no remorse. We laughed about Brewer. It was the first time I saw her laugh, really laugh, and her eyes went entirely green. I filed that away like something valuable. What she didn't tell me, not yet, was the thing that was clearly sitting in the room with us every Tuesday. The canvas tote that was always too full. The way her phone screen was always a child's drawing of a sun. The way she checked the time at exactly 8:30 every single week and began quietly preparing to leave, like there was a clock running she never turned off. I noticed all of it. I didn't say anything. Because I had decided, somewhere in those early Tuesdays, that Callie Marsh would tell me what she wanted me to know when she was ready. And that my job, if I had any job at all, was simply to still be there when she was. What I didn't tell her, not yet, was that I already knew. Not everything, but enough. And that I had decided it changed nothing. It happened on the 5th Tuesday. She arrived later than usual, 7:15 instead of 6:45, and when she slid into the booth across from me, something was different. She'd clearly come straight from a job. There was a streak of beige exterior paint along her jawline she hadn't noticed, and her braid was almost completely undone. But it wasn't the paint or the hair. It was the decision on her face. I recognized it the way you recognize incoming weather. She'd made up her mind about something on the drive over, and whatever it was costing her to carry it through the door. We ordered. We talked about nothing for approximately 7 minutes. Brewer's latest sock victim, a bad paint job she'd seen on Henderson Road. And then she set down her coffee cup, squared her shoulders the way people do when they're about to say something that can't be unsaid, and looked at me directly. I have to tell you something, she said. Okay, I said. I have a daughter. She watched my face carefully. She's 5. Her name is Wren. Her dad has been gone since before she was born. Not dead, just gone. By choice. A pause, precise and deliberate. I'm a single mom, Joel. Fully. No co-parent, no backup, no village. Just me. She picked up her coffee again. Held it without drinking. You can go, she said. Quietly. Without drama. Like she was reading from a script she'd written a long time ago and recited many times since. Most people do. I understand it. No hard feelings. She meant it. That was the part that hit me hardest. She genuinely meant the no hard feelings. She had arrived at a place so far past hoping that she'd made peace with the exit before anyone had even decided to take it. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said it. I already know your secret, Callie. The coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. What? The drawing on your phone case. The Tuesday 8:30 curfew you keep like a religion. The fruit snack wrapper I saw fall out of your tote 3 weeks ago. The way you always order the peach pie. I paused. You once told me you don't actually love peaches that much. But you always get the pie. She stared at me. Ren likes peaches, I said quietly. And you bring her the leftovers. Her expression shifted. Cracked open, just slightly at the edges. You knew, she said. Not a question. I suspected. For about a month. And you just kept coming. Every Tuesday, I said. She looked out the window for a long time. When she looked back, her eyes were bright. Not crying, not yet. Just full. Like a glass someone had filled too high and was now carrying very carefully. Why? She asked. I thought about it honestly. Because nothing I learned about you made me want to leave. It made me want to know more. The diner hummed around us. Someone laughed at the counter. A bell rang in the kitchen. Callie put the coffee cup down. You should still think about it, she said. Knowing and living it are different things. I know, I said. I'm not asking to live it tonight. I'm just telling you I'm not going anywhere. She pulled back after that. Not completely, we were still Tuesday people. But something in her had gotten frightened by how much she'd felt in that booth, and Callie Marsh's response to feeling too much was to quietly, efficiently, create distance. She started arriving later. Leaving earlier. The conversation stayed surface level. Paint jobs. Weather. Brewer. Safe territory. She laughed at my jokes but with a 1-second delay, like she was monitoring herself. I didn't push. But I noticed. One Tuesday she brought a book and read for most of dinner. Actually read it, not as a prop. I ate my burger and watched the Route 9 traffic through the window and thought about patience. About how some people have been disappointed so specifically and so repeatedly that hope itself starts to feel like a threat. You're quiet tonight, she said without looking up from the book. So are you, I said. She turned a page. Joel. Yeah. I don't know how to do this. Still not looking up. I used to. I think. Before Ren. Before everything. Do what? She finally looked up. Green tonight. More green than gray. Let someone in without waiting for them to leave. I let that sit between us for a moment without rushing to fill it. Then don't let me in yet, I said. Just don't push me out on purpose. She looked at me for a long time. Then she looked back at her book. But she didn't read another word for the rest of the evening. It was her idea which surprised me. 6 weeks after the booth confession, she texted on a Sunday, not a Tuesday, which felt significant in the way small departures from routine always are. Ren wants to meet the sock-eating dog. Is that insane? I stared at my phone for a full minute. Not insane at all. Sunday afternoon. 3 p.m. The park on Callaway. And Joel, she doesn't know you're anything. You're just the man with the funny dog. Understood. I showed up at Callaway Park at 2:55 with Brewer on his leash, freshly bathed for the first time in 3 weeks, wearing his dignity like a man who had not, in fact, eaten a wool sock 48 hours earlier. I saw them before they saw me. Callie stood at the park entrance in jeans and a flannel, hair down for the first time, dark blonde, past her shoulders. Beside her, holding her hand with both of hers and leaning outward like a compass needle, was Ren. She was small and electric. Dark eyes, her mother's nose, wild curly hair that had clearly rejected every attempt at organization. She was wearing rain boots despite the clear sky, and she was scanning the park with the absolute focus of a person on a mission. Then she spotted Brewer. "That's him," she announced to no one in particular, and began pulling Callie forward. Brewer, to his eternal credit, sat down and wagged his tail like a gentleman. Wren crouched in front of him, took his face in both her small hands, and said with complete seriousness, "I heard you eat socks. Is that true?" Brewer licked her nose. She dissolved into giggles. I looked at Callie. She was watching her daughter with an expression so full of love it was almost hard to look at directly. Then she felt my eyes and glanced over, and something passed between us. Quiet, mutual, neither of us naming it. "She's been talking about this dog for 2 weeks, Callie said. "Brewer has that effect," I said. We walked the park for an hour. Wren talked constantly about her kindergarten teacher, a butterfly she'd seen, a boy named Cooper who had allegedly stolen her purple crayon with zero remorse. She held Brewer's leash with enormous responsibility. She occasionally reached up and took my hand, matter-of-factly, when we crossed the gravel path, because I was closest. I felt Callie watching when that happened. I didn't make it a moment. I just held Wren's hand across the gravel and let go on the other side. On the way out, Wren looked up at me with her mother's gray-green eyes and said, "Can Brewer come next Sunday too?" I looked at Callie. "Can he?" I asked. She was quiet for a beat. Then, "Yeah, he can." The secret she'd referenced, the real one, not Wren, came out on a Wednesday. She called me. Not a text, a call, which felt like an emergency until I answered and heard she wasn't in crisis, just standing in her kitchen at 10 p.m. unable to sleep. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Always." A long pause. "Wren's father, I told you he left by choice." "That's true. What I didn't say is that I asked him to." I waited. He wanted to stay. But not for me, for the idea of it. The family picture. And I'd watched my mother spend 20 years with a man who was there in body and completely absent in every way that mattered, and I decided, her voice tightened slightly, I decided that Wren having no father was better than her having one who was counting the days. "That took courage," I said. Everyone else called it stupidity. His family. My mother. Even my best friend for about a year. "What do you call it now?" She was quiet. "I call it the right choice that cost everything. She's wonderful. She's the best thing I've ever done. And I am so tired, Joel." The last 4 words came out stripped of everything. No performance, no management. Just the truth of a woman who had been holding a world together alone for 5 years. "I am so tired, and I don't know how to let someone help without being terrified they'll stop." "I know," I said. "How?" "Because I've been watching you for 3 months manage everything within arm's reach so nothing can surprise you. You plan your exits before you arrive anywhere. You preemptively protect yourself from the disappointment." Silence. "That's uncomfortably accurate," she said. "You told me you can't let someone in without waiting for them to leave," I said. "Callie, what if you just stopped waiting? Not trusting me completely. Just stopped actively waiting for me to go." She didn't answer right away. "I'll try," she said finally. "That's all I've got." "That's everything," I said. Here is what 4 months looked like. Sunday afternoons at Callaway Park became a standing appointment. Wren learned to call Brewer by name and address him as though he understood English, which honestly, sometimes I thought he did. Callie started bringing a thermos of coffee and we'd sit on the same bench while Wren conducted her weekly business with the park. The ducks, the gravel, the suspicious squirrel she'd named Gerald. Tuesday dinners expanded to include actual cooking, her kitchen, my kitchen, taking turns, and I discovered that Callie Marsh, who ordered the same diner meal every week for simplicity, could cook in a way that suggested she'd once loved it deeply and was carefully rediscovering that. One Saturday she let me take Wren for 2 hours while she finished a job that had run long, a big Victorian on Elm that she'd been stressing about for weeks. She called me 6 times. I sent her a photo of Wren and Brewer sharing a piece of toast on my apartment floor, and the call stopped. When she picked Wren up, she stood in my doorway for a moment looking at the apartment, the way it looked with her daughter's shoes by the door and a crayon drawing half-finished on the coffee table and Brewer asleep in the corner, and something crossed her face that she quietly put away. I let it go. "Thank you," she said. "Any time. I mean that." She looked at me. "I know," she said. "And for Callie, I know is everything." One evening, after Wren was asleep on my couch under a blanket, Callie and I sat at the kitchen table with the low light on and talked until midnight. Really talked, the kind that happens when defenses get tired and go to bed before you do. She told me about the 2 years of art school. I told her about the relationship that had ended 3 years ago. A woman who wanted a version of me I kept trying to become and finally admitted I wasn't. We sat with each other's histories carefully, like people who understood that the past is not a confession but a map. At the door, leaving, she stopped, turned around. "Joel." "Yeah." "I don't want to keep waiting for you to go." I looked at her in the doorway, her dark blonde hair loose, her gray-green eyes fully green in the kitchen light, paint still on her knuckles at midnight. "Then don't," I said. She kissed me. Brief and certain, not tentative, not dramatic. The kiss of someone who had made a decision and was done deliberating. Then she picked up her sleeping daughter, and she left. And I stood in the doorway like a man who had just had something extraordinary happen to him in the most ordinary possible setting. It was Wren who said it, and she didn't know what she was saying. 7 months in. A Sunday dinner at Callie's apartment. The 3 of us and Brewer, pasta on the stove, Wren drawing at the table in her rain boots. Comfortable. Real. The kind of evening that feels so good you almost don't trust it. Wren looked up from her drawing and said, in the particular tone of a 5-year-old stating established fact, "Joel, are you going to be my dad?" The kitchen went completely still. Callie's spoon stopped. I felt the question land differently than it was meant. Not like an arrow but like a mirror, held up to everything we hadn't said out loud, and everything I suddenly wasn't sure I was ready to be named. "Wren, baby." Callie started. "Because Cooper at school has a stepdad, and I was thinking maybe Joel could be like that because he comes every Sunday and he knows Gerald the squirrel and—" "Wren." Callie's voice was quiet. Firm. "Go finish your drawing, please." Wren looked between us, sensed something she couldn't name, and quietly went back to her crayons. Callie turned to the stove. Her back to me. The silence had a different quality now. "You don't have to answer that," she said. Low. Controlled. "Callie." "Seriously, Joel. She's 5. She doesn't understand what she's asking." "I know she doesn't. You looked terrified." I opened my mouth. Closed it. Because she wasn't wrong. For 3 seconds I had looked terrified. Not of Wren, not of Callie, but of the weight and permanence of what was being built here, and whether I was the man it deserved. "I wasn't terrified of her," I said. "But you were terrified of something." She turned around. Her eyes were gray again. Very gray. "And that's okay. But I need you to understand. I can't do almost. I've done almost. Wren has done almost. We need someone who is sure." "I am." You hesitated, Joel. For 3 seconds. 3 seconds is enough when you've spent 5 years watching people decide you're too much. She said it without anger. That was the devastating part. She wasn't attacking me. She was just telling me her truth with the same quiet precision she told everything. I left that night without resolving it. And I drove home with Brewer in the passenger seat and the particular silence of a man who needs to look at himself honestly and isn't sure he'll like what he finds. 3 days. I gave myself 3 days of honest reckoning. Not about Callie. I was certain about Callie. That had stopped being a question months ago. The question was about me. Whether I was a man who would still be there in the specific ways that mattered. Not on good Sundays in the park, but on the hard Tuesdays. On the sick days and the school play conflicts and the nights Wren had nightmares and Callie had already run empty. I thought about my own father. A decent man who had loved us loudly and inconsistently. Present at the big moments, absent in the ordinary ones, and how the ordinary ones were actually everything. I didn't want to be that. I thought about Wren's face when she asked the question. The complete guileless openness of it. The way she'd said because he comes every Sunday like that was the full definition of reliability she needed and it was already met. She wasn't asking for perfection. She was asking for consistency. I already had that. I'd had it for 7 months. On the 3rd day, I called my sister Nora, 10 years married, 3 kids, the most honest person I trusted, and told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "Joel, what exactly are you afraid of?" "Getting it wrong. Them needing more than I have." "Every good parent feels that," she said. "Every single one. You know what separates the ones who stay from the ones who don't? Not capability. The decision. The ones who stay have simply decided that getting it wrong sometimes is better than not being there." I sat with that. "She's going to think I left," I said. 3 days of silence after a fight. She's going to think I'm doing exactly what everyone else has done. "Then you'd better go," Nora said. "Right now." I was in my truck in 4 minutes. I showed up at her door on a Sunday. Not Tuesday, Sunday. Our day. The park day. I was 20 minutes early and I had Brewer and I had not prepared a speech, which I was starting to regret on the porch. She opened the door. Still in her flannel. Hair loose. Gray-green eyes that went immediately guarded when she saw me, the way they did when she was preparing herself for bad news. "Joel, I need to say something," I said. "Can I say it first?" She stepped back. "Let me in." Wren was at the table with her crayons. She looked up and her whole face opened like a window. "Brewer." Brewer went to her immediately, and they conducted their reunion in the corner while Callie and I stood in the kitchen and I tried to locate every word I'd assembled in my head on the drive over. 3 days, she said quietly. "I thought." "I know what you thought," I said. "And I'm sorry. Not for taking time to think. I needed to. But I should have told you that instead of going quiet." She waited. "I want to tell you what I was actually afraid of," I said. "Not Wren. Not you. Not this." I gestured at the apartment, the crayon drawings on the fridge, the 2 mismatched mugs on the counter. Brewer now asleep across Wren's feet. I was afraid of being the man who loves you both completely and still somehow gets it wrong. My father loved us and still got it wrong constantly. I didn't want to be that. Joel. But here's what I figured out. I took a breath. I have shown up every Sunday for 7 months. In rain. When I had a bad week. When it would have been easier not to. I have shown up because I wanted to. Not out of obligation, not out of almost. And that's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing. Callie was very still. "So I'm not asking to be Wren's dad tonight," I said. "That's not mine to claim. That's something that gets built, slowly, and she gets to decide. But I am telling you, both of you, that I'm not going anywhere. Not because I'm not scared sometimes, but because the thought of not being here is worse than every fear I have about being here." The kitchen was quiet. Wren appeared at Callie's elbow, looking up at both of us with her rain boots and her serious face. "Did you fix it?" she asked. Callie made a sound that was almost a laugh. She crouched down to Wren's level. "Yeah, baby," she said. "I think we're fixing it." "Good." Wren looked at me. "Can we go see Gerald now?" "Yeah," I said. "Let's go see Gerald." Callie stood back up. She looked at me for a long moment. Gray-green, landing somewhere in the middle, exactly where she was. Then she reached out and took my hand. Not the way she'd kissed me, not decided and sudden. The way you hold something you are choosing to trust with your weight. Slowly. Carefully. For real. We walked out into the Sunday afternoon, Wren ahead with Brewer, Callie's hand in mine, and I thought about that first Tuesday. The dropped fork. The shared silence. The sit down, I'm not in the mood for small talk that turned out to be the most generous invitation I'd ever received. She had spent 5 years expecting people to leave. And I had spent 3 years forgetting what it felt like to arrive somewhere and want to stay. We had found each other in a corner diner booth on Route 9, and neither of us had been looking, and that, I was learning, was exactly how the real ones work. If this story reminded you that love doesn't always announce itself, sometimes it just sits across from you in a diner and stays. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what made you finally stop waiting for someone to leave? I read every single one.